Hey, Ted, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for
Hey
joining
Kyle,
me.
thanks for having me.
I know the last time you were on the podcast, we talked a lot about the research that you and your company did. And, since then, you've taken some of that research and put it into a book called Hackable and really talked about how you can use some of these security concepts so I just wanted to kind of, for folks that want to go back and listen to the first podcast we did, it's episode 10, and we talked a lot about the research that you did. And just for folks that maybe haven't listened to that one, if you could just give like a kind of overview about, you and what your company is.
Yeah, so my name is Ted Harrington. I'm one of the partners of a security consulting and security research company called Independent Security Evaluators, and we're like the good guy hackers, right? We're the ones that companies come to and say, "Hey, come break our stuff," before the bad guy does, and fix it. And so as a result of that, of course, how we make money is companies hire us, but we also publish a lot of research. It's essentially the same thing, except that we're doing it to publish it. We're not getting paid for it. And so that's along the lines of what you were alluding to. And some of our research is we've hacked everything from cars to smartphones to medical devices, cryptocurrency wallets. And like you mentioned, I decided to write a book, and when you write a book, you want to tell stories. And so I just tell all these stories from research and stories from our customers too, of course, without naming names. But that's who I am. I help companies build better, more secure software.
And why write a book? So why did you take all this and go through the rigor and the painstaking, or maybe it wasn't painstaking, maybe it was fun for you, but maybe you could just talk a little bit about that, the why, and then the process of writing the book. How was it?
Yeah, it's funny. That's the second time today that someone's actually asked me why write about this super technical idea in a very analog format, which is a book. And it's a really good question. The reason why I wanted to write it in a book is that smart people read books, and I'm trying to meet people, the smart people, where they are, right? And so I wrote a book to help people who are trying to level up their security game, their understanding of how systems work and how to break them and all that stuff. And so when I decided that I was I guess the moment that made me decide it was I really observed sort of two things. First thing I observed was that every conversation that I had with, whether it's a current customer, a prospective customer, or just people that I talk to at industry conferences or just, other parts of my life, it seems like when it comes to security, everyone had really essentially the same 10 problems. And not everyone would necessarily say all 10 of them every time, but every conversation, someone had one or more of these problems was what they were struggling with. And when I first noted that, I realized that, that's pretty interesting. I'll have to think about that. And then as I was thinking about those problems and the solutions to those problems, I noticed something else. And what I noticed was that the conventional solutions to those problems that everybody has, the conventional solutions are almost entirely wrong. That was the moment that sort of kicked my butt into gear to say, look, I said this about myself, like, I know how to solve these problems. And I see it as itself a problem, almost a tragedy, that the people who know they have a problem and want to solve that problem are being given advice that is bad advice. So I wrote this book to correct that whole situation. And when you start, I think, from that position of service, right, which is I can help someone solve their problem, what follows that, the writing process is actually not, I mean, it's hard. It's tremendously hard, and it takes a ton of work, but it's not like it's not unpleasant. It's actually a lot of benefits come out of it throughout the process.
That's great. I like taking that approach that, you're being of service and really helping people figure out what their problems are and how to best solve them. Now, you just mentioned that, a lot of these companies that you help, they have a lot of similar things. You found some patterns with, some of these prospective customers. What are some of those patterns? What are some of those typical things that you saw with customers that kind of got you thinking about how you could put these into a book?
There's a handful, right? So there are things like, one of the challenges is that people don't necessarily know sort of what the right mindset or right approach or right attitude is to approach security. And this is one of those things where people sometimes don't even necessarily state that as a problem. It's inherent and implied in the way that they think about the problems. Another challenge is people don't necessarily know how to work with security consultants. They don't know how to vet them or how to pick between them, or even once they are working with one, how to think about information. Like, for example, a lot of people think that what's called Blackbox testing is this great thing because they think it is like, oh, it's like emulating the attacker. It's like real world conditions, but it's actually none of those things. It delivers all these bad things. Like, it makes your partner really inefficient. I saw issues where people struggle with understanding how much to spend, what to spend it on, when you're spending that money, what are the efforts that it goes towards, how do you fix issues, how fast should you, or how frequently should you look at security again? And then really the big one, the big sort of the big kahuna is, what's the business benefit, right? Look, I'm a security guy. Of course, and I'm an optimist. I believe that security is a value on its own. Like, it's worth doing because it's the right thing to do. And I genuinely believe that about security. But I'm also a pragmatist. And I realize that no business is going to do anything just because it's the right thing to do. Now, let's not pick that apart in terms of like, well, what about defrauding their customers? That's not my point. My point is, like, people don't start commercial for-profit enterprises to just do things that feels right. What they're trying to do is pursue their mission. And a lot of people think about security as this like tax on the business. They think of it as, well, how do we minimize this cost that is security? And that is a problem, because actually what security is it's a differentiator. It's a competitive advantage. And when it's done right and it's used right, you're able to actually use it in your sales and marketing process. And most people don't know how to do that at all, let alone that it's something they can do. And so, you hear these things enough over and over, and you're like, I can solve that. And essentially I structured the book around there's 10 chapters in the book. And the first 9 chapters are, here's how to essentially do security right. Like, here's how to think about your relationship with your partner. Here's the right mindset. Here's the right methodology. Here's what testing should look like. Here's how to fix issues. Here's how to deal with change. Here's how to build security in. Here's how to set your budgets or think about your budgets. And then, so that's the first 9 chapters, how to do security right. And then the 10th chapter is, how do you prove it? Because then if you can prove it, people will buy from you.
I love it. And that really resonated with me when I was reading this book. So I'm a product owner on the product side of things. And, I have an awareness of security, but I don't necessarily know the technical details of a lot of the security stuff. So it was really eye-opening for me to read this book. And I really like that you take that approach to, rather than saying, and like a lot of people, like you said, like a lot of people will do security. It's like, okay, I got to check these boxes, rather than bringing that as a part of your development to make a product, and really having really solid security gives you a competitive advantage to your competitors, and really helps you deliver that really amazing product. And so how do you go about, pitching that to executives who, like you said, they're really focused on, the bottom line, they're focused on what their mission is for the business, and at the end of the day, making money. So how do you approach that to, executives?
Well, I guess there's 3 things to do. So one is tell stories, because storytelling is really, it's how we as humans actually consume information and can figure out how to take action on it. So I tell a lot of stories in this book, but telling stories about companies who did it right and companies who did not do it right. The second is provide data, but minimal on the data. And so this is something I think that's kind of surprising to a lot of people in a very scientific field like security or more broadly in technology, that even though we all love data, we love analyzing it, we love looking at trends and all that stuff, data, no one makes decisions, even though we're all like, give me the data so I can make a decision. No, we make decisions on emotion and based on essentially storytelling. And so what the data needs to do is to support the argument that you make in a story. So when you want to convince an executive of something, you tell them a story that helps them understand, that they can see themselves in the story and they can see the success or the failure that might result. Use data to support it. And then you tell them exactly what to do in crystal clear terms. Literally, do this, and do this. No, don't beat around the bush. Like, be super clear and succinct. And finally, tell them what the outcome is that they will get. And that's how decisions are made by executives. They will, they understand the data to make sure that what they are assessing about the situation actually makes sense. They want to know exactly what to do, and then they want to know what they're going to get if they do that thing.
Yeah, makes it, you make it sound so easy. And I'm wondering how was it like, because and that's something that you do well in this book, I think it is, and the book is called Hackable. I don't think we talked about the name of the book yet, so it's Hackable. And and you do a good job of that in this book of writing really clear stories and analogies and putting things in a way that anyone can understand it. How did you, how was that process for you? Was it easy for you to make it succinct and easy to understand, or was there a lot of editing involved? Like, what was that process like?
That is not easy. One of the things that I've been saying to people that I've learned from this is that it's really hard to write simple. You're like, well, that sentence only has 4 words and this one has like 25 words. You're telling me that one's harder to write? It's like, yeah, that's way harder to write, the 4-word sentence. And so that was really hard. It did require a tremendous amount of editing, but here's the trick to it. So I could give you all the sort of like mechanical and technical sides of how you actually edit a manuscript. But the part that I think is really interesting is, how do you make written word sound easy to understand? You do that by making it sound like you're talking to somebody. And that's really difficult too. So it's like, oh, okay, well, the answer is this really hard thing. So how's that helpful? Well, the way that you do that is you envision someone that you're talking to. So in my case, I wrote my book talking to my nephew, who's he was 12, turned 13 through the process. So he's a smart, interested, curious kid. And thinking that, how do I describe this to him, knowing that he's not the audience for the book. This book is for professionals in technology. But if it can make sense to a 13-year-old, it will make sense to the executives, and they'll thank me for it being easier to understand. Because it's simple. No one wants to work harder than you have to understand it. You want it to be easier. So once I was thinking about, like, I'm going to write this as if I'm speaking to my nephew, that makes a lot of the writing decisions look easier. So for example, I might say something like, I can't remember now what the more complex ways I might say something would be, but here's the perfect example. Someone asked me this yesterday. They said, I'm not making this up. They're like, Ted, tell us, how does machine learning and artificial intelligence impact digital transformation in the way that it will make us think about big data? And how do we synthesize all of this in order to empower our stakeholders to take action? I'm like, what? So I think about a sentence like that, which is like all jargon and buzzwords, corporate lingo. And the question is, Ted, how do we deal with change? My nephew can understand that, right? I can understand that. The executives in the boardroom can understand that. And that's really hard to really simplify what it is that you're trying to say. But if you do that, then what you're able to do is you're able to take your message and actually make impact. Because if the reader has to think too hard and they're like, I'm not entirely sure what he means here, okay, we'll just keep going. And you've just lost the opportunity to help that person solve their problems.
Wow, I love that. That's a great tip. And I asked from a personal level because I've been thinking about writing a book. I've had ideas for books, but then just like never got into the like, okay, I'm gonna get like really go all in and do it. So I've been dabbling, and at some point I think I'll write one. So thanks for that. That's
Thanks.
really really great advice. Um, I wanted to dig into something else that you mentioned about, companies that do it right versus companies that don't do it right. Are there
Mhm.
any examples that you can share?
I have a whole book full of examples. Yeah. So here's what's interesting is that the stories about the companies that don't do it right are way more interesting because they're so dramatic.
Right.
And the companies that do it right, it's like they were supposed to do X, they did X. It's like that's
That's
the
the
story.
story. Yeah.
But I can tell you, I'll tell you some contrasting stories. I do have a good fail and a good success story. So where we should focus the story, let's focus on mindset, because I think that this is one of those areas that is sort of overlooked. A lot of people think like security is security. It doesn't matter how I think about it. But that's like saying like fitness is fitness. It doesn't matter how I think about it. No, it matters. Like if you want to get fit, you're probably going to be in good shape. And if you're like, show me the list of push-ups I have to do and I'll do those push-ups today and that's it. Like you're not going to get right. It's just all about your attitude. So there's one company that we worked with that makes a medical device that injects drugs into your spine. Now, let's just set that as a baseline of what we're talking about here. So we had done this security assessment for this customer, and we were at the end of the project, we were doing what's called a results presentation. We essentially just walk the customer through the different issues that we found, helping them making sure they understand the problems so they can fix them. Because that's our mission, right? We want to make sure that people do something with this and can be better and all that stuff. So we're walking the whole team of our customer through the issues, and the CEO interrupts, and he says, "That's not that big of a deal." And we're like, "Please, elaborate, explain why this isn't a problem." We had literally just showed him how an attacker could attack the software that operates this device, and then as a result, it would actually hurt or potentially kill patients. So this is kind of a big deal if you could actually do that. And his answer was, he says, look, even though what you say could happen, I'm just not that worried about it. Doesn't mean that it will happen. And again, we're like, okay, I just showed you this is a really bad scenario, so elaborate. And he says, look, let me put it this way. He says, I drive a BMW and I love this car. I never want to see it get scratched. And he says, theoretically, someone could take a piano, haul it onto the roof of our office building, throw it off onto my car and completely destroy it. But I'm just not that worried about that. Now, my mind was blown. This guy, we had just explained to him how someone could hurt a patient as a result of using his system. And his answer was to come up with think that it was similar to a very far-fetched, like unreasonable scenario. And, it was a bummer because we couldn't really change his mind. We couldn't turn him around. What he really wanted us to do was sort of just revise what the report actually said. And so it just sort of, that was kind of the end of it. And the story had a sad ending when later he went to go get approval by the government agency, the FDA, that approves medical devices for use on patients. And they started talking about security, and they were like, well, tell us about your security flaws and how you plan to fix them. And basically he tried to shut it. He tried to do the same thing he did to us, tried to like, well, it's not a big deal, and tried to sort of marginalize and dismiss it. And they didn't really like that. And so the product ultimately wasn't approved. And if you don't have FDA's approval, you can't sell the product. So the company went out of business. Now, that's really bad. And I don't mean to, I'm not celebrating that failure. I don't mean to gloat. And I hope that that's not what I'm conveying. But it needs to be, this cautionary tale needs to be shared, right? Here's someone who just didn't want to get better. And so they didn't get better. And so it ended badly. So that's how to do it not right. But
Yeah, you don't
now if you think
want
about,
to bury your head in the sand when the evidence is there in front of you. You have to act on it, right?
yeah, you have to. I mean, and this person was, I really feel for this company and the CEO, because he started from the right place, right? He said, let me get an outside organization. Let me get people who are really good at this. And yeah, it's going to cost me time and it's going to cost me money and it's going to result in work, but let's do it. Like that's where they started from. They wouldn't have hired us if they weren't already demonstrating those characteristics. Those are great characteristics. Everyone should think that way. But when the rubber met the road, when it said, okay, now you got to fix your stuff, I think that's where it really fell apart, because I think what they were really hoping was A, we wouldn't find anything, or B, we would just sort of rubber stamp it and be like, yeah, this is good, which wasn't at all what we were there to do. But we have another customer who sort of had the opposite. And so now we can flip the coin to the other side and say, okay, what about someone who does it right? And this was a company whose story is, like I said, a little bit less dramatic, but still pretty cool. They realized that security really mattered to their customers. They worked in an industry where the people they were selling to really prioritized security. And so even though they were a small company, they didn't have a lot of money, didn't have a lot of people, they still invested to do it right. And they went big. And by big, I just mean they covered the full attack, the full scope of attack surfaces, which is what they should do. And not everyone can do that, but in this case they did. And over time, they were able to find all these issues and fix them and keep getting the product to be better. And that was really a big difference, right? They said once they got the flaws, they went and took action on it. They fixed it. They made sure that their developers were getting better as a result. And, fast forward a few years later, they wind up getting acquired for an enormous, like 9 figures. And you look at these two stories side by side. But I should mention, by the way, that they didn't get acquired just because they were secure. They obviously had everything that made sense for them to be acquired, but they were only in the game because they could prove security. There were other options that could have been acquired as well who couldn't prove security. And so the acquiring entity was like, yeah, we want you guys. And so now compare those two stories, right? One went out of business. One produced millionaires. I mean, that's pretty extreme, right? But that really shows you how this thing that seems like that shouldn't matter. We're talking about this like technical, scientific thing. No, mindset matters. And it really is that big of a difference in terms of the impact to the business is how you think about it.
Wow. Thanks for sharing those stories. I think that's, it's really great to see. I mean, it's a really, those are obviously two completely different ways of looking at security, and it does make a difference on how you react to that information, how you take that mindset and take that approach to security. One of the things that I really liked in your book, and you talked about, and you really, for me, you really kind of took like what the probabilities are in being able to figure out what a private key for a cryptocurrency wallet is. And, I think imagine you're on a beach and, you have a grain of sand. What's the probability that your friend could go to the beach and pick up that same grain of sand? And then multiply that times all the beaches on the planet and let's say, I can't remember how many planets there are that are Earth-like, that have those beaches. And the likelihood of you picking up that same grain of sand is like the likelihood of figuring out, what a cryptocurrency private key is. Yet you were able to figure it out on these 752 different keys, along with this Bitcoin bandit, as you described them, that was able to take out millions of dollars out of these cryptocurrency wallets. How does that happen?
I was really riveted listening to you tell my own story back to me, and how good I was like, damn, this guy knows what's up. Oh man, that was cool. That was cool for me. I was like, yeah, tell me more. Tell me about chapter 1 now. Oh man,
I can't
even remember what your question was. That's how much I enjoyed that. Well, what was the question?
How does that happen? How do you discover? How do you? And theoretically, that should never happen, right? You should never be able to pick up that grain of sand, but you've done it 752 times. Like how?
Yeah. So there's a couple ways to answer that question. We could like dive deep into the technical way or stay at the conceptual level. I think staying at the conceptual level is probably better because there's a whole white paper that someone can read who wants to get into the actual nitty gritty of how we did it. But I think the how does that happen? It's from this mindset of looking at the way that a system is supposed to work and then evaluate, can it work differently? I mean, that's hacking. Now, and of course, that term we should probably mention is a bit abused in the media. You know, a lot of people come to refer to that as bad people. All that a hacker is someone who looks at a system, it's a creative problem solver, and says, hey, can I make it do something differently than it was intended to do? And, you know, like the classic show MacGyver, when he would fix an engine with a paperclip, you know, that's hacking, right? The paperclip wasn't designed to be an engine fixing thing. You know, that was taking something and repurposing it. And that's what hacking is. So whether you're talking about hackers who are motivated to do good, like ethical hackers, people like us and our peers, or attackers who are motivated to do bad, they're both hackers. And so then what a hacker is doing is they're looking at a system and they're saying, okay, well, it has this capability. Can that capability do something else? And essentially, without getting too into the weeds on it, the sort of the what if questions that we're asking, that's the arsenal, in the arsenal of the hacker's toolkit, is the what if questions. Like, what if blank? The what if question there was looking at some things related to errors, and so looking at how the software handled errors. And basically what we looked at was we found that in so doing, that process is what we found a way to abuse. And that's also what the blockchain bandit who stole millions of dollars from this particular exploit sequence that was leveraging the same thing we found. You know, that's what they also had discovered. So that's essentially it. Looking at a system and saying, look, it's supposed to do this thing. What if it does this other thing? And then just trial and error until you find something that you can exploit.
Huh. Interesting. So it was on the error handling piece of it. That's interesting. So something else that you mentioned about is, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, like black box testing. All right, try to hack my shit and try to get in and you kind of caution people against just doing black box testing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I would say I did more than caution. I think I made an academic case against it, except in select use cases. So okay, black box testing. Yeah, that's a good question. So this goes to methodology. I mentioned that one of the problems that people have, whether they know it or they don't know it, is how do you actually work with or security consultant, your security partner, whoever you're having doing your testing. And a lot of companies have this misplaced notion that they want black box testing, because what black box testing is about withholding information. It's about saying what people are thinking with black box testing is they're saying, well, what I want to do is I want to have the attacker try to break into my system. So if I hire somebody to evaluate that, why don't I just like recreate what an attacker would have and just see, can they break in? But that's pretty dumb for a lot of reasons. And the reasons are a few. So the first reason is you're literally paying them. You're paying your security partner to learn the things you already know. So I use the metaphor that I like to use as a castle. And so it's like if a king said, hey, I want to know if my enemies can assassinate me, I will ask one of the nobles in my kingdom to send their knights and see if they can break in, but I'm not going to tell them anything about it. And so now every minute that those knights are spending trying to like break into his castle, they're doing things like they're counting the alligators in the moat. They're looking how many archers are up on the turrets. What's the easiest place to cross the moat? These are things the king already knows. What did the king get by paying somebody to go do the things he already knew? He didn't get anything. And another problem is that what you're really testing, you're not testing your defenses. The king's not testing the castle. The king's testing those knights. Because really what the test says is, can these knights in this amount of time get into this castle? Okay. What does that tell you about your enemies? Like, not really anything. And then the final issue is that you don't know what to do with the information, right? You don't know if they come back and the knights say, hey, we saw some stuff, but we couldn't really get to the king. of the stuff that we saw, we didn't know how to fix it, right? For example, the archers weren't very accurate. Well, is that because the archers have poor equipment? Is it because there's the footing where they're standing is bad? Is it because they're not properly trained? Is it because that wasn't even the archers shooting the arrows because the actual archers were somewhere else? You don't know, because the king didn't tell them any information. But if instead the king had walked them around and said, okay, here's the moat, here's how many alligators are in the moat, here's my archers, you'll notice that this is their first day of training. The knights could quickly, without testing anything, say, well, you're going to want to train your knights and you need more alligators. That took 2 seconds. And that's the kind of stuff that Blackbox actually really prevents you from getting benefit out of. And so the opposite is Whitebox, which is high levels of collaboration, sharing a lot of information. That's where the king is walking you around, pointing things out, introducing you to the guards, introducing you to the architect of the overall system. And that's really the better way to do it. And it replaces this mistaken notion that you can replicate real world results by withholding information. That's really, really bad. What you want to do instead is you want to capitalize on one of the few advantages that defenders have. Defenders have the advantage that's information. Information leads to shortcuts. So being able to say to your security team, this is what the whole thing looks like. What should we care about? And they're like, that might take an outside organization weeks or months or maybe never to get to the that you got in 20 minutes.
Right. And I think in that analogy, you say also too that, the king hired these knights to try to get in and they couldn't. And then a week later they got attacked by this underground tunnel that they never told the knights about. Right. So had the knights known there was an underground tunnel, that's something they could have, used as a way to get in type of thing. So yeah, I think that, you really make the case for making sure that you pick a security partner that's going to, help you figure out, find out those things that are important to you, the things that you know about, the things that that way you can speed up the testing and really get more out of what you're paying for, right?
Totally. Mm-hmm.
So then, I just wanted to ask you a bit about what are your thoughts about how do you choose vendors or third party, because today everyone's got to work with other companies that have technology and they have your data and you guys are sharing data. And, I think Target's probably one of the biggest examples of, having a third party vendor that where there was an exploit that where they, kind of got screwed over because of that. How do you go about choosing vendors and working with third party services? Or how should a company rather?
Yeah, so if you're the buyer of the services and you're looking to hire, whether it's a service provider or you're looking to license or subscribe to a tool, that is a difficult challenge. And the reality is that when you start working with another company, you are inherently accepting their security posture. And so the way to think about that, there's a few. But the first thing that you want to do is you want to really understand what they're doing. And so I mentioned earlier about how in chapter 10, I explained to everyone, here's how to actually use it in your sales and marketing process. So this is sitting on the other side of the table. This is where you want to say, okay, what do I need to be getting from the people who are selling to me? And what should be the things that should raise some red flags for me? The red flags would be anytime you hear people making claims that are hollow or they don't back up or just sound preposterous. So things like some of the things that you hear all the time that are just total head scratchers. People say things like, well, we use bank level security. We have military grade encryption. And those are ridiculous claims because what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, because we use the same encryption as a bank or as a military, what's required in the military, because we use the same encryption, we are as secure as a bank. And that's just not true. I mean, that's like saying this cheap Hyundai, entry-level Hyundai, is actually a luxury car because it has Rolls-Royce grade tire pressure. It's like, okay, yeah. I mean, Hyundai does have the same tire pressure as a Rolls Royce, but it's not a luxury car. Like, what are you trying to imply? You're trying to imply this broader truth. So that's one to be aware of. Another would be things like when people say, oh, we're highly secure, and then they don't back it up. Or when they say, oh, we do annual external penetration testing. And you're like, why do you do it only annually? Why is it only external? And do you know what penetration testing actually means? Are you just getting a scan? These are the kinds of things to look out for, because many companies don't know how to do security, and then they definitely don't know how to talk about it. And so as the buyer, that makes it really difficult in order to understand those services, how they've thought about security, what to do about it. And it just requires a different level of effort in order to understand what you're getting into.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been really enjoying reading this book. I haven't quite finished it yet, but I do like, one of the things that I think that you did that was really cool is you kind of put some Easter eggs, or at least one Easter egg in it. And so you can go and I'm not gonna do any spoilers about the Easter egg. I want to encourage people to go out and buy the book and find it. But then it's interactive too, so you can go online and learn more about what you've learned from the book, and kind of figure out these little hidden these hidden Easter eggs that you got in the book. And so I think it was really cool. It was really fun, and it was good for me, someone that's not super technically savvy, but somewhat aware, kind of putting things in perspective. So I highly recommend people go out, buy the book. You could buy it for your coworkers, people that you've maybe tried to explain security to and they roll their eyes at you or something like that. Like, this is a fun book to read, and it really helps put it in perspective, and really helps the regular person can wrap their mind around it. So I really like what you did there. And where can people get it if they want to buy the book?
Well, it's available on Amazon, so it'll be easy to find. But maybe the simplest thing is to just go to hackablebook.com, and anything you could need as a result of this conversation, you'll find there. So obviously there's a way to buy the book. It describes the book. My contact information is there. So if you wanted to reach out to me about whether it's just speaking engagements or talking about working together, or if it's just, you just want advice, hit me up. I love talking about this stuff. All my information to follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter is all there. So hackablebook.com is what I would suggest.
Awesome. And I'll include that in the show notes as well. And I'll also find that the crypto thing that we talked about, the case study, I'll find that and put that in the show notes as well. So, cool. Yeah. Anything else? Any final thoughts? This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's definitely been fun. I think the only thing to end on is, like I said before, I'm an optimist, and I think that so much of security really focuses on fear and uncertainty and doubt, and it's kind of a bummer. And I think that security, some of those things are true. There's real problems out there. Uncertainty is, no one knows anything about anything. It's just like, yes, these are real challenges, but there's really a bright light to all of this, which is, you look at a book like this, and you look at books that my peers and my friends and everyone in the security community, look at the security community even as a whole, and the security conferences, and there's so many people working so hard to try to drive the industry forward to solve these problems. And that would be one thing I'd want people to take away from this, that yeah, there's real problems, but there's real solutions to those problems. That's why I wrote this book. That's how I wrote this book. And don't succumb to the sort of fatigue that everyone has of security breach headlines and everything. And it's not an impossible task, and we're all in it together. So that would be, I think, the last thing, is sort of just end on a real positive note that, yeah, it's hard, but most things worth doing are hard. And so let's go build better, more secure software systems.
Awesome. I love that final note. So thank you so much, Ted, for taking the time. And everyone listening, go check out the book Hackable. Go to, you say hackable.com or Hackable Book? Hackablebook.com. And get yourself a copy.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me, and thank all of you guys for listening.